about one of the biggest lies our attachment wounds can convince us of, which is I'm trapped, right? Because somewhere along the way, our nervous system learned to associate closeness with losing ourselves, right? If you've ever found yourself thinking, this relationship is too much, I feel suffocated, I'm losing my freedom, I just need to get out of this episode is for you, because how much of the prison, right, that we experience in love is actually created by our own minds, not because our pain isn't real, right? Not because our partner never contributes, but because our minds are incredibly powerful. Sometimes we aren't imprisoned by the relationship, right? We're imprisoned by the story that we've created about the relationship. And until we begin separating the two, we'll continue recreating the same experience with different people. One of the biggest shifts in my own process has been stopping to ask myself, is this relationship making me feel trapped? Or how much of this trapped feeling is actually coming from me, right? Now, before anyone misunderstands me, there are absolutely relationships that are controlling, relationships that are abusive, that violate your values. And that isn't what I'm talking about today, right? I'm talking about healthy relationships, the ones where nothing objectively dangerous is happening, yet internally we feel consumed, overwhelmed, responsible, like we're disappearing, like we're losing ourselves in the process, like we can't breathe, right? That feeling is incredibly real. I've experienced it myself. And when I trace it back personally, right, a lot of it didn't start in my adult relationships at all. It started much earlier with my mom, right? Growing up, being loved by her felt very, very consuming. She was so nurturing and giving and caring and thoughtful in so many ways. But on the other hand, she had no boundaries. She had very high expectations, and often there was conditions to her love that we had to essentially return that kind of love that she gave to us. We had to give that back to her. And if not, then we were made to feel very, very guilty about it. So a lot of responsibility was placed on me, especially after my parents separated, and a deep underlying fear of disappointment, right? If I didn't get it right, then oh my gosh, it was just, I'm this terrible person. I was parentified in a lot of ways, carrying, the emotional weight that was never meant for me to carry. And I also learned something very early on, right? If someone needs me, I might fail them. If I don't meet expectations, I will disappoint them. And also that love has conditions, and I can't be what someone needs me to be. So most of my life, I rebelled against this conformity, right, that I believed relationships required of me. And whenever a relationship starts to require more of me, more consistency, more communication, more emotional presence, more responsibility, more reassurance, my nervous system doesn't just feel involved, it feels consumed, it feels overwhelmed, it feels pressured, like I'm about to fail again. Like I'm back in that old dynamic where love equals performance. And suddenly, even healthy connection can feel like too much, right? Not because it is too much, but because my body remembers what it once cost me. And so for a long time, I thought that if I felt trapped, the relationship must be wrong. If I felt overwhelmed, the person must be asking too much from me, right? If I wanted space, maybe they were just not my person. But as I've continued doing my own healing, I've realized something incredibly uncomfortable. Sometimes the prison wasn't the relationship, right? The prison was my interpretation of the relationship. So yeah, we respond to what our nervous system predicts is going to happen. And that's a huge difference because our nervous system isn't living in the present. It's constantly referencing the past, right? Past disappointment, past emotional pressure, past responsibility that felt too heavy, past fear of failing someone we love. So someone can ask something reasonable, right? And our nervous system hears something completely different. For example, someone says, "Can we spend more time together?" A securely attached person might hear, "Wow, they miss me." But my nervous system might hear, "I'm about to be responsible for someone else's emotional world again, or I'm going to disappoint them if I can't meet this. Or I'm going to lose myself in this." Same words, different nervous system, different reality, right? And one thing I've shared openly with you guys is that I have a reoccurring attachment pattern. Whenever relationships become more serious, whenever someone begins depending on me heavily, Whenever there are expectations, I notice something happening inside of me. My nervous system starts screaming, "You're losing yourself, Jessica. You're going to disappoint them. You're responsible for their happiness and their well-being. We're going to fail," right? And underneath all of that is an old imprint from childhood that if I don't meet expectations, I am not safe in love, right? I'm going to let people down. And what's interesting is that sometimes nothing has actually happened. It's my mind projecting an old blueprint into a new relationship. And here's what I've realized. Healthy relationships actually require us, right? Require our presence. They require our attention, our consideration, our compromise, our care. And that's not control, that's intimacy. But if you grew up in an environment where emotional responsibility felt overwhelming, where love felt like pressure, where expectations felt like danger, the normal relational needs can feel like suffocation, right? I think this is especially true if you've spent years priding yourself on being independent. I know I have. Right? Being capable, not needing anyone, doing everything myself, holding everything together, avoiding disappointment by not relying too much on anybody. And then suddenly someone comes into your life, someone who genuinely wants connection, wants to know what's on your mind, wants to know what's on your heart, someone who texts you, someone that wants to know about your day. They want to make plans. They need reassurance, right? And all of a sudden, your nervous system says, this is too much. This is way too much. Whoa. But is it? Right? Or is this simply what healthy interdependence looks like? Right? One of the greatest questions we can begin asking ourselves is this: am I experiencing self-neglect, or am I simply experiencing the normal sacrifices that every healthy relationship requires? Because they're very different, right? Every relationship asks something different of us. Every single one, there's no exceptions. You will never find a relationship where nothing is required of you. If someone wants closeness, they'll require more connection, right? If someone values independence, you'll sacrifice emotional closeness. If someone travels constantly, you'll sacrifice consistency. If someone wants children, you'll sacrifice freedom. Every relationship has a cost. And the question isn't, can I avoid sacrifice or can I avoid compromise? The question is, which sacrifices align with my values, meaning aligns with what is important to me? And I've experienced both ends. I've been in relationships with partners who leaned much more avoidant, and there was so much independence and autonomy. There was so much space. And yet the emotional intimacy wasn't there, right? Something was missing. That depth was missing. The relationship, it lacked connection, like true connection. And then I've experienced relationships with someone who needed much more closeness, more reassurance, more emotional availability. And at times that felt overwhelming to my nervous system. So neither dynamic was perfect, but both required something different from me. And that taught me something really important, right? That no relationship is going to feel effortless all the time. Even if you're predominantly secure, no one's perfect. We're going to lean a little bit anxious. We're going to lean a little bit more avoidant, or that fearful avoidant, right? So no one's going to be perfect. And every single relationship, every human is going to require something different of you if you choose to coexist with them. That's what relationships are all about. Right? So every relationship asks us to grow somewhere. And I think one of the biggest lies our attachment wounds tell us is, if I'm uncomfortable, something must be wrong, right? But healing has taught me that sometimes discomfort is simply the cost of becoming more secure. Contrary to what pop culture tells us today, right? Because everything is just, if you're uncomfortable, if you're feeling triggered, well, then get out. And I just don't agree with that. I really don't agree with that. And I think that's very dangerous advice that will lead us to a lot of isolation as humans. So many things about relationships are indeed uncomfortable. Learning to receive love is uncomfortable. Learning to depend on someone is uncomfortable. Learning to let someone depend on you is uncomfortable. Learning to communicate instead of shutting down is uncomfortable. Learning to stay present instead of avoiding is uncomfortable. None of that automatically means it's unhealthy. If you have insecure attachment, oftentimes this evolvement process is uncomfortable. And this is where healing really begins for many of us who perhaps struggle with, the avoidant attachment specifically, because our go-to response has always been avoidance, right? If I feel pressure, I withdraw. If I feel overwhelmed, I detach. If I feel responsible, I shut down. If I feel consumed, I create distance. But avoidance doesn't actually heal the wound. It just protects it, right? So one of the greatest lessons that I've learned about this is, cultivating secure attachment isn't about becoming someone who never gets triggered. It's becoming someone who no longer automatically believes every trigger. And that's very different, right? We can feel trapped without actually being trapped. We can feel responsible for everything without actually being responsible for everything. We can feel consumed without actually losing ourselves. Right? Feelings deserve compassion, but they don't always deserve control. So the next time you feel yourself saying, I can't do this, I feel trapped, this relationship is consuming me, pause and ask yourself, is this relationship actually imprisoning me? Or is my nervous system trying to protect me from an old wound where love felt like pressure or responsibility and the fear of failing someone I care about? Because those two are very completely different questions, and the answer could completely change your life. If there's one thing I hope you take away from today's episode, it's this. Becoming secure isn't learning how to avoid discomfort. It's learning how to become curious about it, because sometimes the prison door has been open all along, and we've been living inside a story that convinced us that it was locked. And as we continue healing, right, we slowly begin separating the past from the present, right? Fear from reality, protection from love. And that's where freedom begins. Not because relationships stop requiring us, but because we stop believing that every request for connection means we're going to fail or disappear or lose ourselves in the process. Instead, we learn that healthy love will always require something from us: our presence, our honesty, our vulnerability, our willingness to communicate instead of defend, our ability to self-soothe instead of react, and our capacity to understand that love is by nature a form of coexistence. And coexistence will always involve sacrifice and compromise, not as punishment, but as connection. And when those sacrifices are aligned with our values, they don't become self-neglect, they become love. If this episode resonated with you and you're ready to stop living from your attachment stories and start living from your values, I highly encourage you to check out my Secure Self Toolkit or book a free clarity call with me for personalized support. Inside, you'll find guided attachment rewiring meditations, communication scripts, nervous system exercises, and practical tools to help you build a more secure relationship with yourself and others. And remember, everything we've talked about today ultimately leads back to one place: becoming more of your secure self, right? That part of you that can stay present in love without losing yourself, that can feel deeply without being overwhelmed, and that can choose relationships from clarity rather than fear. And as always, thank you for listening.